The thing came in along the Kesson verge, out past the last lit star the Concorde bothered to name, and the watchman who caught it spent a long moment deciding it was a fault in his own eyes. His name was Orin. He sat alone in a room the size of a small moon, and the room was dark, so that the lights could be bright, and the lights were stars, and not one of those stars belonged to him. He belonged to the Concorde. Everything belonged to the Concorde. It had held 60,000 worlds so long that no mind alive could point to the year it began, and it had grown old the way a mountain grows old, without noticing, and it did not care for new things arriving where nothing new was allowed to arrive. Orin leaned toward the panel. A single shape hung far out where no shapes should be, too small to be a proper vessel, too deliberate to be a rock. He tapped the glass with one thin finger and pulled the image close, and the shape resolved into something that made the fur along his neck stand up. It was ugly. It was square where a hull should curve, blunt where it should taper, welded and patched and put together in a hurry by hands that clearly did not care how a thing looked as long as it flew. And there were marks along the flank. Letters, he thought, though no archive he could reach held a script to match them. He searched anyway. He searched the way a man checks a lock he already knows is locked. 9 million years of Concorde memory, 60,000 worlds of names and banners and claims, and against all of it the little ship returned nothing. No razza, no registry, no master. And that, more than the ugliness, more than the strange letters, was the thing that turned his stomach cold, because the galaxy did not work that way. The galaxy was full. Every star wore a crest. Every people had been counted and placed and, if it grew troublesome, pruned. New things did not simply drift up out of the dark wearing letters no one could read. He should report it. He knew that the way he knew his own name, but some soft, small part of him, the part every watchman buries under the long, dull years, whispered that a thing unreported was a thing that did not yet exist. Reported, and it became real. Real, and it became his. The little ship turned then, slow and unbothered, and for one absurd moment, Orin felt it was looking back at him. He reported it. The report climbed. It went to his captain, and his captain sent it higher, and it kept climbing past every rank that had a face, until it reached a chamber with no doors and no windows and no year, where 7 minds sat in a ring, and spoke for the whole of everything. They had been the oldest thinkers of the oldest races once, before they were folded into the Concorde and fed by it and owned by it, and somewhere across the long ages they had set down their names the way a traveler sets down a pack, and taken up purposes instead. The iron seat spoke for command and for war. The ledger seat weighed all things in loss and gain. The pale seat carried fear, though it had found no use for it in an age, and so on around the ring, each a single word wearing the shape of a mind. The iron seat looked at the image of the blunt little ship and did not lean forward, because it never leaned forward. A scout, it said, and the word was flat as a floor. Send ships, take it, find the rock it crawled from, and put out the rock. We do not permit sparks. That was the way. It had always been the way. Every few thousand years some young thing kindled on a wet stone far from the center, and the Concorde let it warm just enough to be worth the trouble, and then it reached down and pressed the spark flat, servant or ash, depending on the mood of the ring. There was no war in this. The Concorde would have said if the Concorde ever bothered to explain itself. There was only tending. A weed pulled before it could throw seed. So the ships went. Not many. The Concorde did not spend a great fleet on a spark. 14 vessels, each one a walking city of gray metal, each one carrying weapons that could open a world's crust and let the fire underneath come pouring out. The crews were proud in the flat, incurious way of soldiers who have never once been beaten and have therefore stopped imagining it as a thing that happens. They had been told they were going to tend a spark. They believed it the way you believe the sun will rise. They followed the little scout's trail back into the dark, and the trail was wrong. It bent where it had no reason to bend. It doubled back on itself. It threaded the long way through dead stars and drifts of dust as though whoever had drawn it did not want to be followed and understood, precisely and coldly, exactly how following worked. The navigators frowned and did not worry. A clever spark was still only a spark. At the end of the wrong-shaped trail hung one yellow sun. Around the yellow sun turned one green world. The 14 ships slid to the edge of the system and looked at it, and the commander of the 14, an old soldier named Varric, felt something touch the back of his neck that he had not felt in a very long time, a cold light finger of doubt. The world was loud. Not loud with guns. Loud with talk. The space around it fairly seethed with signal. A storm of voices and music and numbers and moving pictures pouring up off the surface and out in every direction at once. Flung into the dark on purpose, without shame, without caution. The fleet's listeners caught scraps of it. Arguments. Songs. Laughter. Stories told in 100 tongues at the same time. This was not a shy little world hiding in its own light and hoping the galaxy would look elsewhere. This was a world standing on its own doorstep and shouting into the night. Scan it, Varek said, and they scanned it. And the numbers came back, and the deck went quiet. The world was small. The people were young. By any Concord measure, they had only just learned to step off their own stone. A scatter of little stations in near orbit, a handful of camps on the dead rock that circled them, a few thousand armed craft all told, and most of those small, the kind a single family might crew. No empire, no true fleet. By every rule the Concord had ever used to weigh a thing, this race was nothing, thinner and greener than most of the sparks it had pressed flat over the ages. Varek should have felt relief. He felt none, because under the numbers the scans showed something else, and the something else would not let him look away. The world was scarred, not lightly. It was written over, edge to edge, with the marks of war, old war and recent war, war stacked on war going back as far as the instruments could read. This little green people had been fighting since before it could speak, fighting itself, fighting its own weather and its own ground, fighting and learning and fighting again, over and over, without pause, and the weapons were the part that made the finger press harder. Most young races built one kind of killing thing, whatever their world's chemistry made cheap, and there they stopped and waited for the Concord to arrive. This one had built all of it, fire and poison and rot, things that split the smallest pieces of matter and let out a captive sun. Enough, several times over, to unmake their own world entirely. They had built every last means of ending themselves, and they had not used it. They had walked up to the edge of their own ending again and again across the generations, held it in both hands, looked over the drop, and each time, by the thinnest possible margin, chosen to keep living. Varek did not understand what he was looking at, but the old soldier's part of him, the part that had carried him alive through 30 prunings, told him plainly that this was not a spark. This was a thing that had spent its whole brief, violent life learning one skill more thoroughly than any race the Concord had ever pulled up: how to not die. "Commander," said his second. "The order?" Varek looked at the green world a while longer. He thought about the words that had come down from the ring. Take the scout, put out the rock, clean. Simple, the way it had always been done. "We approach slowly," he said. "We open a channel first. We speak before we burn." His second stared at him as though he had begun speaking backward. "We do not speak to sparks," the second said. "We speak to this one," Varek said. He could not have told anyone why. Later, with time to turn it over, he decided it had been the noise. A spark hid and hoped. This thing wanted to be heard. A thing that wants to be heard is a thing that expects, somewhere in itself, to survive the hearing. Before the channel opened, one ship of the 14, running point along the system's rim, found a small structure adrift at the edge of the yellow sun's reach, a listening post. Old, patched, alone. Its dish turned outward at the dark. The point ship's log recorded it in a single flat line and moved on. One structure? Negligible. No one aboard the 14 thought about it again for a long while. It was tended by one keeper, and the keeper had a name, though the Concord did not trouble to learn it. His name was Tomas Reyes, and he had sat at that dish for 30 years, sending the same patient call out into the nothing, and listening for anything at all to come back. He was the voice, though the 14 ships never knew it, that they had been catching in scraps all the way in. He was the one who had been calling. The point ship did not fire. It simply passed, and its passing left the dish dark. Hold that. It comes back late. So Varek, against the grain of 9 million years, opened a channel to the green world, and the green world answered before the channel had finished opening. The voice that came back was calm. Varm even. It spoke the trade tongue, the common speech the Concord had spread across the worlds like a stain, which meant these people had been listening to the light leaking off the Concord's own edges, and had taught themselves, unasked, the language of a power they had never once met. "Hello," the voice said. "We see you. Welcome. We were starting to wonder if anyone would ever come." Varek felt the cold finger dig in. "You knew we were coming," he said. "We hoped. the voice said. It gets quiet out here. We have been calling a long time. You are the first thing that ever called back. There was no fear in it. There was no challenge in it either. It was the voice of someone opening a door to a stranger on a cold night. Curious. A little glad. Entirely unafraid. Varric had pruned 30 worlds across his long life. He had heard 30 kinds of fear. The proud kind and the pleading kind and the silent kind. That is the worst of all. He knew fear the way a diver knows water. From the inside, in the dark. He heard none of it now. You should be afraid, Varric said. He did not say it as a threat. He said it the way you might say the ice is thin. Almost a warning, almost a mercy. We are the fleet of the Concord. We have come to tend you. You are small. You have no army that could stand against a single one of my ships. Before this conversation is finished, your world could already be over. There was a pause, and then the voice laughed. Not a cruel laugh. A surprised one. The laugh of someone who has just understood that the stranger at the door has read the whole house exactly wrong. Oh, the voice said. Oh no. You think this is the army? Varric said nothing. Commander, the voice went on. Gentle now, the way you speak to someone walking toward a cliff they cannot see. What you are looking at down there, all of it. The ships and the stations and the camps and the few thousand armed crews you counted. And I am sure you counted them. You seem like a careful man. That is not the army. That is not even close. That is what we keep at home. That is the ones who did not want to leave. The deck around Varric had gone still and cold. This is the quiet corner, the voice said. A nice one. We are fond of it. But the ones who go out, the ones who actually do the fighting, they do not sit at home. They have not been home in a long while. We sent them into the dark a long time ago, looking for exactly the kind of door you just opened for us. And here is the part you are not going to enjoy, Commander. They are already past you. The second made a small choked sound. You followed our scout in as straight a line as it let you, the voice said, almost kindly. You came right up to the front door and knocked. You never once looked behind you. Why would you? You came to tend a spark. On the fleet's great screens. The dark behind the 14 ships was empty and stayed empty. For now, the voice said. We did not send the real ones to meet you. We sent them to meet whoever sent you. We have had that heading for a while. We are rather good at headings. It is nearly the only thing this world ever truly learned to do well. Where to point the thing that ends people. And when. Varric stared at the loud, fearless, war-scarred little green world that had built every weapon a mind could dream and turned none of them on itself, that had taught itself the speech of a power it had never met, just so that one day it could say precisely this. You are bluffing, Varric said. His own voice did not convince him. Maybe, the voice said. You came a long way to find out. It would be a shame to go home not knowing. And 60,000 light years off, in the chamber with no windows, the pale seat, the seat of fear, sat up straight for the first time in 1,000 years, because something was moving toward the center of everything, toward the still point, toward the ring, and it was not slowing down. The chamber with no windows had not changed in 10,000 years, and it did not change now, but the things inside it did. The 7 seats sat in their ring. They had sat there through the death of stars and the slow guttering of whole races and wars, so old their names had rotted out of the record entirely. They did not move much. They had no need. The Concord moved for them, reached across 60,000 worlds and did their will, while they sat in the dark and decided. Now the pale seat spoke, and its voice shook, which no one in that room had ever heard. Something is coming, it said. From the verge. From where the 14 went. The fleet sends word, the iron seat said. It was not a question, and it was not worried. It had never in its long life had cause to worry. No, said the pale seat. The fleet sends nothing. The fleet has gone silent. A pause traveled around the ring, slow, like cold moving through metal. Silent how? The iron seat said. Gone, the pale seat said. All 14. They opened a channel to the green world. They spoke, and then they stopped. Every one of them. At the same instant. No distress. No fight. No flash of weapons on any glass we own. They were there. And then they were not. The way a flame is there. And then is not. The iron seat considered this. It had lost ships before. War spends ships. This was nothing. Send more, it said. There are no more to send to them, the pale seat said. Listen to me. Please. The thing that took them is not at the green world. The thing that took them is coming here. Toward the center. Toward us. And it is moving faster than anything has the right to move. The ledger seat, which weighed all things and had never once been surprised by a sum, leaned into the dark. How fast, it said. The pale seat told them the number. And the chamber with no windows was silent in a way it had never been silent. Because the number was not possible. Nothing crossed the deep dark that fast. The Concorde's own fastest ships took years to span the empire. The thing the pale seat was tracking would cross that same gulf in days. It had already crossed most of it. It had been moving while the 14 were still listening to the green world's friendly little voice. It had been moving, perhaps, long before the 14 ever set out. What is it? The iron seat said. And for the first time in 10,000 years, it was not giving an order. It was asking. I do not know, the pale seat said. It matches nothing. It is not one ship. It is not a fleet. It is between. It is many small things moving as one large thing. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Spread wide, layered deep. Each one alone too small to be worth a shot. All of them together too large to be anything but the ending of something. The green world said it sent its army out. The deep seat murmured. The deep seat spoke from memory. And it remembered everything, including the things the others had spent ages trying to set down, the last thing the 14 heard, before they went quiet. The green world said the real ones were already past them, on their way to whoever sent the ships. The ring went still again. Whoever sent the ships, that was them. That was the Concorde. The 14 had been sent by the iron seat, on the will of the ring, in the name of the conquered. Out of this very chamber at the center of everything, the green world had not aimed its people at the 14. It had aimed them here. That cannot be, the iron seat said. They did not know where we are. No one knows where we are. The center has been hidden since before your memory. Deep seat. And yours is the oldest thing that lives. They asked the 14 to speak before they burned. The deep seat said, softly. And the 14 spoke. And while the 14 spoke, the green world listened. Not to the words, to the signal, to where the signal was born, and every rock it bounced from on the way. They followed the order back up the chain, the way you follow a thread back to the spool. They never needed to know where we are. They only needed us to answer them once. The iron seat did not reply. You're good, Commander, the deep seat went on, and there was something in its voice now near to wonder. Your Varek did a soft thing, a strange thing, a thing the Concorde has not done in the whole of its life. He spoke to a spark, before he pressed it flat, and in the doing, he drew a bright straight line from that spark's front door back to this chamber. They have been climbing that line ever since. They are nearly here, and across the Empire, the Concorde began to wake. It had been a long time since the Concorde had truly woken. It had no need. The worlds obeyed. The fleets patrolled their long, slow rounds. The prunings happened on their schedule, and the great slow mind at the heart of it all could sleep through everyone, dreaming its great slow dream of order without end. Now it woke, and the waking ran out along 60,000 worlds like a shiver under skin. On 100 worlds at once, war fleets that had rusted at anchor for centuries lit their engines. On 1,000 worlds, the servant races who tended the Concorde's machines felt the ground tremble and looked up, afraid. In the deep vaults where the Concorde kept the terrible instruments it had taken from 100 murdered peoples, old horrors stirred and turned their blind faces outward, toward the thing that was coming. The Concorde had never been attacked. In 9 million years, no one had ever come for the center. The center was the safe place. The center was the still point. The center was where the deciding happened. Far from any harm. Untouched. Untouchable. The Concorde did not know how to be attacked. It had forgotten, if it had ever known, that being feared and being safe are not the same thing. It learned the difference quickly. The first of the small things reached the outer ring of the center's guns. And the guns, the great old guns that had not fired in living memory, swung to meet it. The small thing was not a ship. The guns had been built to kill ships. This was less than a ship, a sliver of metal no longer than a body, carrying nothing but an engine, and one cold intention. It did not turn. It did not dodge. It came straight on, and the guns fired, and they struck it, and it did not matter, because behind it came 1,000 more, exactly the same, and behind those 1,000 more. The center had built its defense to stop an empire, to stop ships the size of cities and fleets the size of nations, the kind of enemy the Concorde could imagine because it was the kind of enemy the Concorde itself was. It had never built anything to stop a swarm. It had never once imagined a swarm. Why would any people build 10,000 small dying things and fling them all at once into the teeth of the guns? It was crude. It was wasteful. It was the act of a race that did not weep over its own machines, that made death cheap and threw it by the handful, that had learned somewhere in the mud of its own endless wars, that you do not need one perfect spear when you have 10,000 poor ones, and a reason to throw every last one. The guns fired until they glowed. They killed thousands. They could not kill enough. The swarm was not a thing you defeated. It was a thing you outlived or did not, and the center had never learned to outlive anything, because nothing had ever asked it to. The small things slipped through. Not all. Not most. Enough. Enough slivers past the great old guns and into the soft, unguarded space behind them, where the worlds of the center sat fat and easy, having never once in 9 million years needed guarding, and in the chamber with no windows, the pale seat began, at last, to do the thing it had been made for, and had never truly done. It came apart. Pull the fleets back, it said. All of them. From every world. Bring them here. Bring everything here. If we pull the fleets, the ledger seat said, the worlds rise. 60,000 worlds obey us because the fleets are among them. Take the fleets away, and the empire falls open in a season. The empire is already falling open, the pale seat cried, and the sound of a voice crying out had never been heard in that chamber, and the others drew back from it. Look, they are inside the wall. We have no wall. There is no center. There is only us and them, and they are almost in the room. The iron seat, the seat of war, which had ordered the 14 out, which had called the green world a spark, spoke then, and its voice had changed. It was smaller. What do they want? It said. It was a strange thing for war to ask. War did not ask what enemies wanted. War asked only how to break them. But the iron seat asked because it had begun, slowly, the way an old mind takes in a new thing, to understand that it did not know how to break this enemy, that this enemy might not break at all, that this enemy had spent its whole short, vicious life learning the one skill the conquered had never once needed, the skill of the cornered, the skill of the outnumbered, the skill of throwing everything you have at the thing that means to end you and not stopping, ever, until one of you is gone. And out past the swarm, the answer came, a signal, the same calm, warm, fearless voice that had spoken to Varric at the green world. It reached into the chamber with no windows, into the center of everything, into the ring of the 7 seats, who had weighed the fate of 60,000 worlds, and had never once weighed their own. Hello again, the voice said. We can see you now too. We have wanted to meet you for a very long time. The 7 seats listened. There was nothing else to do. You sent 14 ships to tend us, the voice said. We tended them instead. They are well, by the way. Your commander Varric is well. He spoke to us, instead of burning us. And that turned out to be the single wisest thing anyone in your whole empire has done in 9 million years. We do not kill people who talk. The voice paused. We kill people who will not, it said. And you have never once talked to anyone. You have only ever decided. We know. We followed the lineup. We have seen what waits at the end of it. We have seen this room. We know you are listening. So here is what happens next, and I want you to understand that we are telling you plainly, because we would honestly rather you chose the easy way. The swarm filled the dark around the center now, a cloud of small cheap deaths past all counting, and behind the swarm, just arriving, the real thing, the thing the swarm had cleared the road for, slid out of the deep dark and into the light of the center's many suns, and the 7 seats of the Concord saw the true army of the green world for the first time, and the pale seat stopped crying out, because there are some things too large to cry out at. It was not what they had braced for. That was the first thing the 7 understood. And the understanding was a wound. They had expected warships, great gray cities of metal like their own, bristling and grim, built to crush. That was what an army was. That was what an army had always been in every memory the deep seat carried. This was not that. The true army of the green world was made of every kind of thing. There were warships, yes, blunt and square and angry, the same ugly shape as the little scout that had begun all of this, but around them and between them and out ahead of them came everything else. Ships that carried other ships, ships that built ships, machines that swallowed raw metal at one end and gave back finished weapons at the other, so that the army did not have to bring everything it would ever use. It only had to bring the means to make more. Ships that grew food in long green rooms, ships that held thousands of the green world's people, whole families, the young and the old, because this was not a fleet flung out to fight a battle and come home. This was a people on the move. This was the green world's children, who had gone into the dark long ago in search of a door, carrying with them everything they would need to never turn back. And now they had found the door, and they had brought their whole lives through it. They are not soldiers, the ledger seat said slowly. They are settlers. They have come to stay. They are both, the deep seat said. That is the thing you cannot hold in your mind, that none of us can hold, because none of us has ever lived the way they have lived. To them there is no line between the one who fights and the one who plants. The same hand that turns the field holds the weapon over the field. They learned it in their own mud, on their own stone, fighting one another for 10,000 years over the same small patches of ground. They learned that the only land you keep is the land you can hold, and the only reason worth holding it is the life you build on top of it. So they do not send armies. They send themselves, all of themselves, and they do not stop. The Iron Seat watched the army come and felt a thing it had no name for, because it had never had need of one. It was watching a thing that would not break. The Concord's wars had always run the same. You broke the enemy's army, and the enemy's people gave up, because the people were not the army. The people stood behind the army, and once the army fell, the people had nothing left to fight with. That was war. That was how war had run for 9 million years. But here the people were the army. There was no behind. There was no line to break, no fleet to scatter that would leave the rest of them helpless. Every ship that built ships meant that killing 10 of their ships only delayed the 11th. Every transport of families meant that this was not a force you could ever make surrender, because surrender meant the ending of their children. And there is no fear anywhere in the galaxy stronger than a parent's fear for a child, and no force anywhere stronger than that same parent. Once they have decided the child will live no matter what it costs. They cannot mean to take the whole center, the pale seat whispered. It is 60,000 worlds. They are one small world's worth of people. The count is nothing. We outnumber them 20,000 to 1. We outnumber them, the deep seat agreed. And they do not care. That is the part you keep failing to hear. They have always been outnumbered. Their whole history is being outnumbered. Every war they ever fought, someone had more. More soldiers, more weapons, more ground. And the ones who lived through it, the ones whose children now fly toward us, they are the children of the ones who won anyway. They do not believe in the count. They have a word for it. We caught the word in their signals. Fewer, they call it. And they have a saying about being fewer. They say, fewer is a number. Staying is a choice. The voice came again then, into the chamber with no windows, warm and unhurried. We are going to slow down now, it said. We are close enough. We do not actually want to fight you. I know that is a hard thing to believe with the swarm and all. But the swarm was only ever to get your attention and clear your guns. We are very good at getting attention. We have been calling into the dark a long time, like I said. Mostly, no one answered. You answered. You sent 14 ships to make it stop. So now we are here, and now you have to listen the whole way through. Because we are inside your house, and your guns cannot reach us anymore. What do you want? The Iron Seat said again. And this time the question did not feel strange to ask. We want to talk, the voice said. Properly. All the way to the end of it. The one thing you have never done with anyone. You came to the center of the Concorde, the ledger seat said, with an army that does not stop, and a swarm that broke our guns. And you want to talk? Of course, the voice said. How else would anyone ever get you to take them seriously? You do not talk to the weak. We learned that from watching you. We learned everything from watching you. You only ever speak to a people when you have decided they are strong enough to be worth pruning. So we made ourselves worth pruning. We made ourselves impossible to look past. And now you are listening. And now, at last, we can have the conversation we wanted from the very start. There was a long silence in the chamber with no windows. You could have come as friends, the pale seat said. And there was something in it close to grief. The grief of an old thing seeing all at once how it had spent its life. You could have come asking. We might have, the voice said, gently. No, you would not have. We know you would not have. We watched you do this 30 times. A young thing kindles, full of hope, and reaches out. And you take it or you burn it and you call it tending. We are not your 31st spark. We are the one that watched the other 30 and learned. We came the only way you would ever respect. We came strong. And now that you respect us, we can afford to be kind. Because kindness from the strong is the only kind you have ever been able to understand. You taught us that. Every lesson we are about to teach you, you taught us first. The Iron Seat, which had ordered the 14 out, which had named them a spark, which had never lost, spoke slowly. And if we say no, it said. If we tell you to leave. If we fight, then we fight, the voice said. And there was no anger in it, no boast, only a flat and dreadful certainty. And we lose ships, and you lose worlds, and we lose more ships, and you lose more worlds, and it goes on, because we do not stop. That is the one thing about us you have to understand all the way down to the bottom. We do not stop. You will win 1,000 battles. You will outnumber us in every single one. And at the end of all of them you will look up and find that you have lost. Because winning battles was never the thing. Holding was always the thing. And we are very, very good at holding. The voice paused. But we would much rather talk, it said. We came all this way to talk. So let us talk. And the 7 seats of the Concord, the oldest minds of the oldest races, who had weighed the fate of 60,000 worlds from a chamber with no windows, who had never been afraid because they had never had cause, looked at the unbreakable thing that had walked into their house, and began, in their last age, to learn how to be the ones who listen. Far out at the edge of the empire, on the green world, an old woman sat in a small room and watched the same signals everyone watched. Her name was Ellen. She was not a soldier. She had never once been to space. Her children were out there in the dark, in the army, at the center of everything, and she had not heard their voices in 18 years, since they had gone, since the whole world had gathered up its strength and emptied its bravest and its best into the long throw at the heart of the power that ruled the stars. She had been young when they left. She was old now. She had spent the whole span between not knowing whether the throw had landed, whether her children lived, whether the great gamble of her world's entire history had worked or had only flung her people's blood across the dark for nothing at all. Now the signal came back down the long line, the same line her children had climbed, and it carried a single word, the word the whole world had waited 18 years to hear, the word that meant the door was open, and their own hands were holding it. The word was through. Ellen put her face in her hands. She did not weep the way you weep for grief. She wept the way you weep when a thing you gave your entire life to, a thing you had no right to expect would ever come true, comes true anyway, against the count, the way being fewer is supposed to be answered. Her children had reached the center, and the center had listened. In the chamber with no windows, the iron seat spoke, and its voice was the voice of a thing learning to bend after 9 million years of standing straight. Tell us, it said. Tell us what you would have of us. And the calm, warm, fearless voice of the green world's children, who had crossed the whole of the dark to talk, began at last to talk. It was not a list of demands. The seats had braced for demands. They knew demands. Demands could be refused, or granted in seeming, and starved in fact. This was not that. It was a question. How long? The voice said. Since any of you wanted anything, truly wanted it. Not order, not obedience, not the empire ticking on the way it always has. Something for yourselves. Something you would cross the dark for. Something you would throw everything at and not stop. The chamber with no windows was silent, because not one of the 7 could remember. And in that silence the first true crack ran through the Concord. Not from any weapon. Not from the swarm or the unbreakable army. From a question asked kindly by a people who had wanted a thing so badly, they had thrown their own children into the dark to reach it. The Concord had held 60,000 worlds for 9 million years, and in all that time it had not wanted a single thing. The green world had wanted, and the wanting had carried it to the center of everything. The seats began, slowly, terribly, to understand which of them was the strong one. The talking went on for 11 days. The seats had thought it would be quick. Everything the Concord did was quick in its own way, because there was never any doubt about the end of it. The Concord decided, and the thing was done. There had been no true conversation in 9 million years. Only commands going down and obedience coming up. This was different. This went back and forth. The green world's people asked, and the seats answered, and the answers opened onto more questions. And slowly, painfully, like an old joint worked after long stillness, the Concord began to remember how to think instead of only how to decide. The one who spoke for the green world had a name. The seats had not braced for that either. Their own kind had set their names down long ago, traded them for purposes. The green world speaker had kept hers. It was Nadia. She was not the leader of the army, because the army did not have a leader in any shape the Concord could recognize. The army made its choices together, in councils, in arguments, in the loud and tangled way the green world did everything. Nadia was only the voice they had sent up the line. Because she was good at being heard, and because she was not afraid. You keep asking why we do not simply take it, Nadia said on the fourth day. Why we do not seize the center, throw you out, sit in your ring and rule the way you ruled. You keep waiting for it. You think that is what strength is for. To take the high seat. It is what strength has always been for, the iron seat said. That is why you are dying, Nadia said. Not cruelly. The way a healer names an illness. You sat in the high seat so long you forgot there was anything else to do up there. You stopped wanting. And a thing that stops wanting stops living. It only takes a while to notice. 9 million years, in your case. You have been dead for most of them. You just had too many worlds holding up the body. The deep seat, the seat of memory, stirred. Then what would you have us do? It said. If not, take the seat. You hold the center. You have the strength. Strength must do something. Strength should make room, Nadia said. The seats did not understand. You spent 9 million years closing the galaxy, Nadia said. Every young thing that kindled. You took it, or you burned it, or you bent it. You pressed 60,000 worlds into one shape. Your shape. The still shape. The shape that does not want anything. And the galaxy went quiet. We heard the quiet from our little green rock at the edge. We heard a whole galaxy full of life all squeezed down into one dead shape, and not one voice in the whole of it calling out, except us, calling into the dark, wondering why nothing ever called back. They could not answer, the pale seat said. We did not allow it. I know, Nadia said. That is the thing we came to change. Not who sits in the ring, what the ring is for. We did not cross the dark to rule 60,000 worlds. We have our hands full ruling one badly, the way everyone rules everything badly. With a great deal of arguing, we came to open the galaxy back up, to make room, to let all those worlds you flattened stand up again, and want things and call into the dark and finally, hear something call back. And on the worlds of the Empire, the news spread the way water spreads when the wall of a dam gives way. It did not spread because the Concord announced it. The Concord announced nothing. It spread because the servant races who tended the machines and grew the food and built the ships had been listening, the way the green world had taught the whole galaxy to listen. Simply by refusing to be quiet, they heard that a thing had come to the center. They heard that the center had not crushed it. They heard, for the first time in 9 million years, the Concord doing a thing it had never done. They heard it lose an argument. A small thing. A single argument in a chamber with no windows. Against one small world's stubborn voice. But the servant races had lived their whole long captivity under one simple iron fact. That the Concord did not lose. That it could not be argued with. That to resist it was not brave but simply impossible. Like arguing with the pull of a star. And now the star had blinked. On a world called Toloa, where a gentle, 8-fingered people had served the conquered for 100,000 years, grinding ore in the dark of the smelting yards. An old worker set down her tools and listened to the signal coming down from the center and did not pick the tools back up. The workers beside her looked at her. She looked back. None of them said anything. None of them needed to. They had all heard the same thing. The Concord could lose. And if the Concord could lose, then everything they had believed about the shape of the world was wrong. And if that was wrong, then perhaps the part where they ground ore in the dark forever was wrong too. The old worker walked out of the yard. The others followed. By the end of the shift, the smelting yards of Toloa stood empty, and no one had fired a shot, and the great machines of the conquered stood cold and silent for the first time since before the workers' oldest stories had a beginning. It happened on Toloa. Then it happened on 100 worlds. Then on 1,000. Not war. Not kite even revolt. Something quieter, and far more dangerous to a thing like the conquered. The world simply stopped. They stopped grinding, stopped growing, stopped building, stopped obeying. They raised no armies. They did not need to. The Concord's whole strength had always been in the obeying. Take away the obeying, and the Concord was a mind in a chamber with no windows and no hands left to reach out with. In the chamber with no windows, the ledger seat, the seat of trade, watched the empire come apart in real time, world by world, and did a strange thing. It laughed. The others turned toward it. A voice laughing was very nearly as strange as a voice crying out. Do you not see it? The ledger seat said. We told ourselves we held them by strength. We held them by their belief in our strength. The belief was the whole empire. Not the fleets. Not the guns. The belief. And this small loud world cracked the belief in 11 days. Not with weapons but by simply being a thing we could not crush. Every world that hears we argued with someone and did not win stops believing. And every world that stops believing stops obeying. We are not being conquered. We are being disbelieved. We are coming apart because the galaxy has stopped agreeing to imagine us the way it always has. Then we are finished, the pale seat said. Yes, the ledger seat said, and there was no fear in it now, which was strange, because it sat beside the seat of fear, and the seat of fear was shaking. The Concorde is finished. The Concorde was finished the moment your good commander Varek opened a channel instead of firing. We have been finished for 11 days, and are only now noticing, the way we have been dead for 9 million years, and are only now noticing. The question is no longer whether the Concorde survives. It does not. The question is what we do with the time that is left, and whether we do it as the thing that crushed 30 worlds, or as something else. Nadia's voice came into the room. Soft now. That is the first wise thing anyone in that room has said in a long while. She said, "You have been listening. Good. Then listen to this. Because it is the offer. The real one. The reason we came all this way to talk instead of to fight." The 7 seats listened. "We do not want the seat," Nadia said. "I told you that. We could not even sit in it if we tried. Not really. We are one small world, and there are 60,000 of you. The moment we tried to rule you, we would become you. And we would rather die than become you. No offense. So here is what we want instead. We want you to do one last thing with all that strength before it is gone. We want you to let go on purpose." "Let go of what?" the Iron Seat said. "Everything," Nadia said. "All of it. The whole empire. Do not hand it to us. Do not hand it to anyone. Just open your hands and let it fall open. Take the machines you use to crush the worlds and turn them to building. Take the fleets you use to prune and turn them to carrying. Carry food and people and word between worlds that have not been let speak to one another in 9 million years. Spend the last of your strength making room. And then step down. Not because you were beaten, because you finally wanted to do a thing. And the thing you wanted was the last good thing a dying empire ever gets to do. You undo yourself on purpose, with your head up, and the galaxy remembers you not as the thing that closed it but as the thing that, at the very end, opened it again." The chamber with no windows was silent a long time. It was the deep seat, the seat of memory, that finally spoke. Because memory more than any of them understood what was being held out. The Concorde would be remembered. The Concorde had spent 9 million years making certain it would be remembered as the master of 60,000 worlds. The still point, the order without end. And it had failed. That memory was already dead, already curdling into a different one. The tyrant that fell, the dead thing that fed on the living until one small loud world at last said no. But there was another memory on offer. A last one. The one Nadia was holding out in her open hand. "You are offering us a better death," the deep seat said. "That is what this is. You came across the dark not to kill us. You knew we were already dying. You came to offer us a better way to die than the one we had earned." "Yes," Nadia said, simply. "That is exactly what we came to do. We are not monsters. We only had to look like the thing you respected long enough for you to let us in the room. Now we are in the room, and now we are telling you the truth. You are dying. You have been dying forever. You can die as the thing the whole galaxy spits on, the tyrant that finally fell. Or you can die as the thing that, at the very end, with the very last of itself, chose to open its hands. Your call. We cannot make you. We never could make you do anything. Not really. That is the secret. No one can make anyone do anything. They only have to believe they can. You believed it about 60,000 worlds for 9 million years. Now stop believing it about yourselves. You get to choose what you are at the end. Almost no one gets that. We are giving it to you." And in the chamber with no windows, the 7 seats of the Concorde, the oldest minds of the oldest races, who had never chosen anything, because choosing means there is more than one road, and they had only ever been able to see the one, looked for the first time at 2 roads and understood that they were free, and had always been free, and had thrown that freedom away 9 million years ago, and named the throwing order. They had wanted nothing for so long. Now, at the end, with the galaxy coming apart around them and a small loud world holding the door open, they found, deep in the old dead place where wanting used to live, that they wanted one thing after all. They wanted to be remembered well. It was a small want, a vain one, perhaps, but it was a want, the first in 9 million years, and it was enough. "Tell us how," the Iron Seat said. "Tell us how to open our hands." And Nadia, the voice of the small loud world that had crossed the dark, began to teach the Concorde how to let go. It took longer to take an empire apart with care than it had taken to build one with cruelty. That surprised everyone. It should not have. Cruelty is fast. You break a thing and it stays broken. Care is slow. You have to set each piece down gently, in a place where it can stand on its own, and then wait, and make sure it will not fall the moment you turn your back. The Concorde had crushed 60,000 worlds in 9 million years. It would take 90 years to set them free without letting them shatter. The Concorde spent those 90 years. It was the last thing it ever did, and it did it well. Fleets that had patrolled the worlds to keep them obedient turned instead to carrying. They carried food to worlds that had only ever grown the one crop the Concorde demanded and now found themselves free and hungry and not knowing how to feed themselves. They carried teachers between worlds that had forgotten how to speak to one another. They carried, most of all, word, the simple word that the galaxy was opening, that the long quiet was ending, that any world with a voice could now use it and be answered. The great machines that had built warships turned to building other things. Ships that carried people who wanted to see worlds their grandparents had only heard of in forbidden stories. Stations where the freed races could meet and argue and trade and fall in love and have all the loud, tangled arguments the green world had taught. The galaxy were the very sound of a thing being alive, and the green world's army, the unbreakable thing that did not stop. It did not conquer. It did not rule. It did the thing Nadia had promised, which was stranger to the watching galaxy than any conquest could have been. It helped. It turned its building ships to building, its growing ships to growing, its whole terrible strength to holding doors open rather than breaking them down. The families that had crossed the dark spread out across the freed worlds, not as masters, only as neighbors. The loud, argumentative neighbors who would not stop talking and would not stop wanting and, slowly, by sheer stubborn example, taught a galaxy that had forgotten how to want again. On Toloa, where the gentle, eight-fingered people had walked out of the smelting yards, the old worker who had set down her tools first lived to see a thing she had no word for, because her people had never once needed one. She lived to see her grandchildren choose what to do with the day, choose what to make, choose where to go. Small choices, the smallest choices there are, the kind the green world's children made 1,000 times a day without a thought. To the old worker they were the largest things in all the universe. And she watched her grandchildren make them, and she wept the way you weep when a thing you never once dared hope for arrives anyway. Commander Varric, who had opened the channel, who had spoken to a spark instead of burning it, lived a long time too. The green world had kept its word. He was well, more than well. In his old age he became a kind of teacher, going from world to world to tell the story of the day he broke 9 million years of habit by simply choosing to speak for young races, newly freed, hungry to understand how the long quiet had broken, would gather to hear him. Why did you do it? They always asked. You were sent to burn them. You had the order. Why did you talk? And Varric, who had turned it over for the rest of his life and never once been fully sure, would give the only answer he had. Because they were calling, he would say. The whole galaxy was quiet, and they were calling into the dark, and I had spent my entire life in the quiet, and I was so tired of it that when I finally heard a voice with no fear in it, I wanted to hear what it had to say. That is all. That is the whole reason the galaxy is free. One tired old soldier wanted to hear a voice. You would think it would take more than that. It never does. It only ever takes one person, somewhere in the chain, choosing to listen instead of to crush. There was one more thing Varric did. Late, when he was very old, he went out to the edge of the Kessin Verge, to the small patched listening post that his own point ship had passed and left dark on the way in, all those years before. He had read the logline by then. One structure, negligible. He had learned, too, the name of the one who had kept it, Tomas Reyes. 30 years at a single dish, sending the same patient call into the nothing, listening for anything to come back. The voice the 14 ships had caught in scraps all the way in, and never once thought to wonder about. Varric found the post cold and empty. The dish still turned outward at the dark, and he stood in it a while, the old commander in the dead man's quiet room, and he understood at last that the first casualty of the whole long story, and the reason for the whole long story, had been the same thing. A voice, calling. He had the dish turned back on. He aimed it at the center of everything, now bright and loud and full of answer. And he let the old keeper's call go out one more time, into a galaxy that would, this time, call back, It was the only monument the man ever got. Varek thought it was the right one. The 7 seats of the Concorde lived to see most of the 90 years. They did not live to see all of them. A mind that has been dying for 9 million years cannot be held alive forever, not even by a sudden late discovery of the will to live. One by one, as their work finished, as the worlds they had set free learned to stand, the seats let themselves go. They had wanted one thing at the end, to be remembered well, and they had earned it. And a thing that has earned the only thing it ever wanted does not need to hold on. The pale seat went first, the seat of fear, which had come apart when the swarm broke the guns, which had cried out in a room where no one had ever cried out. It went quietly in the end, all its fear spent, having learned the one thing fear exists to teach and is so rarely allowed to teach, which is that the thing you are most afraid of is sometimes the very thing that saves you. The iron seat went last, the seat of war, which had called the green world a spark and sent 14 ships to press it flat. It held on the longest, because it had the most to undo, and it would not let itself go until the last fleet it ever commanded had finished carrying the last load of grain to the last hungry world. Then, its whole strength at last spent on building instead of breaking, it spoke one final time to Nadia, who had stayed in contact across all the long years, who had become something near to a friend, to the dying thing she had crossed the dark to unmake. "You said we taught you every lesson you taught us," the iron seat said. Its voice was very faint now. "You said you only learned to be kind because we taught you that kindness from the strong is the only kind you could understand. I have turned that over for 90 years. I do not think it is true. I think you were always going to be kind. I think you only told us we taught you so that we would not feel we had given the galaxy nothing but cruelty. I think your last kindness to us was a lie, and the kindest Lee ever told." Nadia was old herself by then. The young woman who had crossed the dark was a grandmother now, on a freed world a long way from the green rock where she had been born. She took a long time to answer. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe you did teach us, and the kindness was always in us, and both things are true at once, the way most true things come in pairs. Does it matter? You did the good thing at the end. That is the part that is real. Everything before it, the 9 million years, all the worlds you crushed, that is real too. We do not pretend it is not. The freed worlds will tell that story as long as there are worlds, but they will tell the other one too. The one where the thing that closed the galaxy chose, at the very end, with the last of its strength, to open it again. Both stories. Forever. That is more than most things get. Most things only get the one, and it is usually not the kind one." "Was it worth it?" the iron seat asked. "Your world threw its children into the dark. You did not see your own mother again. You crossed everything, wagered everything, on the chance that we would listen instead of burn. If the luck had run the other way, if I had given the order to fire on your green world instead of opening a channel, your whole people's gamble would have ended in ash. Was it worth the risk?" And Nadia, the grandmother on the freed world under the strange suns, looked out at a galaxy full of voices, full of argument, full of wanting, full of all the loud, tangled noise of life that her people had spent 18 years and everything they had to set loose. And she gave the answer the green world had always given, the one it had learned in its own mud, in its own endless wars, the one that had carried it across the whole of the dark, to the center of everything. "Fewer is a number," she said. "Staying is a choice." Far away on the green world, the long quiet had a name now, in 100 new tongues, and the breaking of it had a name too, and the names were taught to children on 60,000 worlds, and somewhere in the deep dark between the stars, the small ugly square scout ship that had begun all of it, the one Orin the watchman had caught at the edge of the Kessin Verge and very nearly not reported, the one with the strange letters on its flank that no archive held, drifted now in honored stillness at the center of everything, kept and tended and never moved. The letters on its hull, which no archive had held, which had frightened an empire that could not name them, were read aloud at last at the monument's dedication. In the trade tongue, the whole galaxy now shared freely. They were not a threat. They were not a banner. They were not the name of any army. They were 4 small words. The words the green world had painted on the first thing it ever flung into the dark. The words that were the whole of its hope, and the whole of its history, and the whole of the reason the galaxy was free. The words said, "We never went quiet." And the galaxy, loud and free and full of wanting, answered back across the dark in 100,000 voices, the way the green world had always longed to be answered, the way it had called into the silence for so long with no reply. "We heard," the galaxy said. "We heard." We are here too. We are calling back. You are not alone anymore. And the small ship drifted, and the suns of the center burned, and the empire that had frightened everyone was gone, and the thing that had grown up in its place had no ring and no master and no still point, only 60,000 worlds full of voices, all of them talking at once, all of them alive, all of them, at long last, unafraid.